Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on from where you are joining us today. Welcome to the CMC Crossroads webcast series broadcast, Out of Date, Out of Touch, the business case for ALM transformation. This webcast is brought to you by CMC Media and is sponsored by CollabNet. I'm Francesca Matu, and I will be your moderator today for this webcast. In a few moments, Kevin Hancock and Tracy Reagan will join us to discuss the business case for ALM transformation. But first, a few housekeeping details. Our live cast environment is intended to be completely interactive, so you will have the ability to post your questions at any time during the broadcast or chat with other attendees about the session. We will address audience questions at the conclusion of the webcast during the Q&A period. If we are unable to get to all of your questions during the presentation, someone will follow up via email. To ask a question, simply use the live chat window located to the right of the screen under the tab Chat. You can also undock the chat box from the screen using the pop-out button at the bottom right corner of the chat box. That way it won't get hidden behind the slides. If you would like to share your thoughts about today's presentation, please use the Facebook tab located to the right of the screen. Log into your account and you will have the ability to share your experience with your friends. You can also share your experience through Twitter. Click on the Twitter tab to the right of the screen and join the conversation. Your tweets will show up in the Twitter roll to the right. Now make sure to use the hashtag #CMCLC. That's #CMCLC. If you would like a copy of the presentation materials for today's session, you will find a button to download a copy on the Links tab at the right of the webcast window. A recording of the entire live broadcast, including Q&A, will be available in about 24 hours at the same location, so you can come back again or recommend it to a friend. And finally, if you ever need to get a closer look at any of the slides during the presentation, just hover your mouse over the video player and click the full button to expand to full screen. Okay, so let me introduce our speakers joining us today. First is Kevin Hancock. Kevin is responsible for building out CollabNet's partner distribution channel and acts as the major customer advocate across the CollabNet organization. In his 10+ years at CollabNet, Kevin has led the successful implementation of CollabNet's products and services at some of its largest customers. Working with his clients to transform their globally distributed application development teams to modern Agile enterprises, he has saved these organizations millions of dollars. Our next speaker, Tracy Reagan, has had extensive experience in the development and implementation of business applications. She began her consulting career in 1989 consulting to Fortune 500 organizations in the area of testing, configuration management, and build management. It was during her consulting experience that Ms. Reagan recognized the lack of build management procedures for the distributed platform. In the years leading to the creation of OpenMake software, she worked with development teams in implementing a team-centric, standardized building management process. And with that, I will give the floor to our speakers.
Thanks, Francesca. Hey, everybody. This is Kevin Hancock with CollabNet. Joining me today is Tracy Reagan from OpenMake, as Francesca just mentioned. During today's conversation, we'll cover the following agenda topics. I'm going to take the first few bullets here, and then Tracy will be following me. We'll also be doing a short demonstration as well, and then it'll be followed by a question and answer session. We've already covered this, so I'll skip through this quickly. So today, people come to CollabNet for a number of different reasons, and OpenMake as well. And when we come into organizations, we typically see a situation where organizations have grown up via acquisitions and mergers. They've grown up over time to become a very disparate group of organizations. Each group has its own set of tools, its own set of processes, and a number of different people that go into the development process. These folks really need a scalable infrastructure to allow that organization to both collaborate and develop software that's necessary in today's environment. These folks come from a number of different teams, as you see here, each of them with their own needs and their own problems that they're having today. They span the globe, and oftentimes they include both third parties as well as other organizations that might be outside your firewall as you build these applications. What we also see, and I apologize for this slide, it didn't quite transfer in quite well, so what I really just want to point out here is that when you're working in a large organization, most teams quite rightly focus on their issues. They've adopted the tools, the processes, the procedures that work best for them, but at the end of the day, the enterprise isn't just a big work group. You need to involve a lot more stakeholders outside your team. You need to get them involved in the entire process. You need to touch a lot of different pieces of the organization, and through that, you're going to need something that works for all of those different stakeholders. As CollabNet has worked on this issue with a number of different customers throughout the globe and over the last 10+ years, these are some of the different problems we've come across. One that I really want to point out is the third bullet here, or the third box, is that what we typically find is that in a lot of organizations, your average software development engineer or coder is spending a lot of time not only working on code itself, but also managing the infrastructure. They spend a lot of time on build and test machines. You may have that one individual who's written all of your test scripts. You may have that one individual who's responsible for a large portion of your build environment. And if that person leaves or if that person goes to a different position, unwinding some of those things and trying to find out what was actually done can be difficult and painful. So you need to start thinking about, well, as we scale this across the enterprise, how can we take advantage of the knowledge base across the enterprise, and how can we start to address a lot of these issues that we're having? From the analyst perspective, and as teams start to take on a more agile approach to software development, what we're also seeing is that the global distribution of development today is bringing its own unique difficulties. If you talk to a number of Agile purists, they'll tell you that you really can't do Agile in a distributed manner, but the realities of today say that you must do that in order to work in today's environment. So you not only need to look at tools and processes and procedures that scale across the enterprise, but you need to keep in mind this global distribution of your teams, the ability to leverage those teams on whatever projects are necessary, the technologies that are necessary, etc. So what do we do about this? And why are we being driven to take a look at new things? So there's really kind of both factors inside and outside the organization that are affecting this change. What we find right now is a number of your tool vendors out there have started to upgrade their technology. They've started to take a look at how do we allow for these globally distributed teams to work together. What do we need to do in our tool base to allow these kind of changes to take place? So a number of you are being asked to take a look at either a new version of a piece of software or an application that you're using today, or to migrate to something new to do this. Additionally, as I just mentioned, a number of teams are looking at new processes, agile development processes like Scrum, looking to do continuous integration and things like that. All of these things are forcing organizations to take an internal or external look and see what they need to do to change. So one of the key steps is attending seminars like today to learn and educate yourself on what is out there. So by attending today, you will get a copy of a white paper that was co-authored by CollabNet and OpenMake, which is the title of this, The Out of Date, Out of Touch, the Business Case for ALM Transformation. This will take you through some of the key things to take a look at as you start to consider this transformation. Some of the things that we've learned in both our consulting as well as in our approach to developing tools for these organizations that need to make this change. At the end of the day, you need to take a look at your tools, your processes, your people, and keep in mind that this isn't just across your development organization, but you also need to include all those folks that are involved in any of the application development process. You need to think about the business stakeholders all the way down to the operations folks who will be rolling these applications out into the production environment. How do we include all of those folks in that chain as part of this change as the organization looks to transform itself? So CollabNet really takes a look at this in really 4 different stages. The first is really your internal look today, just to investigate what is out there. What do you have today? Take an inventory of all your different assets that you have, your tools, all the different things that you have out there. And I think what you'll be interesting to find is that it's actually very difficult to put costs and measurements around this. What you typically find in a lot of environments is that the tool costs and things like that are buried in enterprise license agreements. The effort that people put into maintaining and administering these tools is often buried because sometimes it's a portion of a developer's time or a portion of a QA member's time. If you have a build meister or somebody like that, it's a portion of their time that's being taken away from, if you will, the core business that they should be thinking about and working on these other things. So as you start to investigate that, think about all these different factors that go into that. The next step we typically see is really this consolidation. What you want to start to take a look at is all the different things you have out there, and how do we start to standardize that environment, bring it under one umbrella. For example, about 4 years ago, I went into a financial services company, and in that company, I found 12 different issue trackers on one floor in a building. A number of different people, a number of different teams, each that had come across their own issue and their own problem that they needed to solve right then, and each went about it a little different way. And you'll find the same thing in code repositories. And oftentimes you'll find that groups have Perforce and PVCS and Subversion and CVS and Git and all these different tools out there that they're using today. But what you need to start to do is think about is, how do I consolidate these? Which ones do my teams really need and really use? But more importantly, as I start to consolidate these things, I can solve a lot of other business issues that I might have. Things like lowering my administration costs, the ability to audit users and their roles and their permissions, and how do I gate those permissions to individuals that need access. What you often find today when you go into these organizations with a large number of different tools is you spend a lot of time trying to go back and audit and figure out who had access to what. Well, as you start to consolidate these things, you can determine a better way to gate access and better ways to solve those permissioning issues. Once you've got things consolidated and you've got things cut down to a reasonable number, you can now start to look at automation. Figure out what things you want to automate, those day-to-day tasks that occur, those things that make most sense to script, and those things where you need to put in some enforcement around workflow. What kind of continuous integration environment you want to set up. Which ways do you want to allow people to access and enter information into this system. So once you have it consolidated, then you can start to think about these automation issues. And then really, this fourth bullet is something unique to CollabNet and the way we start to think about things. So CollabNet comes from open source roots. We have a lot of, or we talk about development organizations a little different than other tool companies out there. We start to talk about the ability to build communities of development teams and the ability to create that community within your organization, that once you have things consolidated, once you started to consolidate processes and tools and people into various platforms and provide that visibility into these solutions across your organization, you can start to build trust around the organization. People understand what's going on out there. People understand what other groups are doing. Not only do they start to understand it, but they start to build upon it. They start to borrow things. They start to reuse code and reuse test scripts and build scripts, etc. All these things that then allow you to start to do social coding and allow that development community to start to generate its own ideas and start to take ownership of everything across that process. These things will really start to drive down your costs. You'll save money in a number of different ways. You'll start to save money, obviously, on just tool administration itself. As you start to consolidate the tools, you'll start to cut out some of those that are redundant. You'll start to choose those that fit your organization better and start to retire licenses. As you take out tools, you start to take out administrators and cost of servers, etc. Additionally, as you start to do this, you should be able to start to repurpose some of these people that were part-time administrators and people who spent a lot of time getting things back to a known state at some other time. Those folks can now start to concentrate on the organization's objectives and start the organization or start to concentrate on those things that are important not only to the team itself but across the organization. So you'll start to drive these costs and business benefits in a number of different directions. Now, CollabNet, what we focus on at the end of the day is a platform itself. Our platform is CollabNet TeamForge. What TeamForge allows you to do is start to bring these things in those same kind of 4 stages, where you first, once you've determined what you have out there, you first start to consolidate those things. And we typically see most of our customers start to consolidate around their code first. They start to take a look at all the different repositories out there, all the different things that they have, and they start to consolidate that. CollabNet is one of the corporate sponsors of Subversion. We typically recommend that's where companies look at first when they go around their code repository. But TeamForge itself has an SCM adapter, so we work with a number of different code repositories. We work with Perforce and CVS. We work with ClearCase. We have a Git integration that is currently a services integration, but will be rolled out in the product in our next major release. So as we build upon that, we start to introduce those other things that are important to any development processes. You start to look at your planning and your tracking of bugs and artifacts, user stories, etc. All of these things are integrated into the TeamForge environment and allows you to consolidate all those artifacts into one system. You then provide the different layer around team collaboration. You allow the reports and statistics, the ad hoc discussions, the forums, the wikis, etc. All of these things that go into a software development process are all consolidated into one repository. Not just the code, but all the different artifacts as well that go into that. You provide an architecture around that fits your organization. You set up projects and communities and things like that allow people the ability to navigate across your organization. You allow them to set up their own communities. If you have a group that's looking at Ruby or wants to start the latest technology or start a community around tests and things like that, you can start to do all those things. Additionally, we understand that there's a number of different tools out there and a number of different users that interface with this type of environment in a number of different ways. So you have a number of different tools that connect in, that either come in via an API or provided as canned integrations from CollabNet itself. You reach out to the users themselves and allow them to connect in the manner that best suits them. So for developers, you connect at the IDE level. We provide integrations with things like Eclipse and Visual Studios. For the business user, we provide integrations into the Office applications and Microsoft Project and things like that. But then as you want to extend that into things like with code review and test plans and build items and things like that, all those integrations are allowed to be brought into the TeamForge environment. The things created by those things are allowed to be shared out in the same type of environment. All of this done through a central administration layer, which allows you to gate access to individuals across your organization based on their role in these different projects. You may have projects that everyone's a member of and everyone has access to. You may have projects and communities that only people that are actual employees of your organization are to. But you may also have other things that only third parties have access to. All those types of complex organizations and complex relationships can be handled and maintained in the TeamForge environment. All of this brings into what becomes a responsive, a well-governed infrastructure, a scalable and connectable infrastructure, if you will, that allows each of those different groups that want to reach into the development organization the opportunity to, allows them to have the access and to connect with the tools that they use on a day-to-day basis. It allows them all the information they need so they don't have to be, so the teams themselves don't have to be bothered with the constant taps on the shoulder and the constant interruptions that go into it to say, you know, what's the status of this? It allows you to push out that information and provide that interface across the organization so people understand what's going on, when deliverables will be made, but also what changes may be coming down the pipe that will impact those things later. So the ops organization can share with the development organization the OS stacks and changes they're going to be making in the infrastructure that will affect that development going forward. Just a quick case study before I turn it over to Tracy to talk more about kind of the other things you may look at and how you may extend this type of environment across others. The URL here is for an Information Week article from one of our customers, DST Systems in Kansas City. Where they came from was, as I mentioned before, about 1,200 individuals using a hodgepodge of tools. They were supporting and developing on a legacy platform. It was a number of different applications that had grown up over the years, and they had reached a point where it took about 24 months for a release cycle. So when they were looking to roll a major release, they were facing about a 2-year window until they could get that release out the door. This wasn't providing them the flexibility and that their customers were demanding, and the need to add additional features and things like that as you move forward. What they did was as most companies do, they held a number of evaluations and looked at a number of different tools and processes and procedures. They really chose a couple different paths. They chose to adopt a new methodology. They've moved to an Agile process. They adopted Scrum across their organization. They introduced CollabNet TeamForge as a platform for those teams as they move forward. It took them about 10 weeks to make that transition to get CollabNet TeamForge installed, configured, set up, and start to move the different assets onto the platform itself. This included bringing code from legacy code systems into Subversion. It included bringing artifacts and things like that. It included transitioning their build scripts and things like that all into the platform. So that took them about 10 weeks to take care of that. Now, after that 10 weeks, all those 1,200 users weren't then on the platform. Those brought on the key teams that were looking to change right away. But what they've done then is opened up the platform to those other additional users and allowed them to come over as they see fit and as their release schedule. Because as you plan this out across the organization, what we typically see is you can't expect there to have the ability to have a big bang approach and turn off one development environment on a Friday and expect to have everything back together on a Monday. You take it on a team by team organization and product approach. You determine what can be done and what fits your release schedule as you start to do this. So what DST was able to do is reduce that release cycle from 24 months to 4 months, allow them to get products out the door, obviously at a much quicker pace. What they also saw, interesting enough, was also an increase in their developer productivity. They quoted developer productivity of a 20% increase on developers. And a lot of that is a number of different factors. Some of that is that now that things are consolidated, they're easier to find, and people aren't switching between different environments and things like that. Another big factor of that is that now the developers can focus on developing themselves. They don't have to worry about tool infrastructure and things like that. It's all there for them, and they don't have to worry about those things anymore. So just a quick case study there for you to think about. Now I'm going to turn over to Tracy to talk about this transition and the new ALM World Order. Tracy?
Thank you, Kevin. So leaving off where Kevin, or starting where Kevin left off, there's challenges in getting from these older legacy systems to what we're calling this new ALM World Order. Probably the biggest challenge that you will face is the human factor. As was pointed out earlier, you have many teams who have purchased licenses for different tools and have their favorite environments. However, those environments may be somewhat of a thorny bush. It's sort of like the story about the villager who came to the Zen monk, and he said to the Zen monk, "Mr. Monk, I am in so much pain. I'm in pain all the time." And the monk looked at him and said, "Well, you're holding on to a thorny bush." And he says, "Yes, I know, but I'm not sure what to do." And the Zen monk said, "Well, all you need to do is reach as high as you can for the sky." And the villager reached his arms way over his head and stretched up to the sky and suddenly looked down and realized he had dropped his thorny bush and reached down and grabbed it really quick. That's what we face with many of the end users who have adopted practices around these older legacy systems, is that they are holding on to a thorny bush and it's become a habit. So how do we deliver a new world order and ease the anxiety around adopting new practices? I picked out 3 points that we've learned over time that helps ease the anxiety and the concerns around moving from older systems to new systems and sort of letting go of that thorny bush permanently and getting out of the habit of holding it. The first and the most important is the equality factor. The new process must be equal to all development environments. You can't choose a tool set that supports, say, .NET really, really well, but just only a little bit of Java, or vice versa, a tool set that is heavily Java-oriented but doesn't support .NET. There has to be also a flexibility and an openness that encourages productivity, meaning that some of those teams have tools and practices that they don't want to let go of, and you're not going to convince them to. So the new process needs to be flexible and have a low friction factor to it. And finally, there's got to be a level of simplicity, and that simplicity must be delivered through both automation and centralized control. I hear a lot of people talk about automation, but they still rely on build and deploy scripts to drive that automation. When I'm talking about automation, I mean truly automating the process whereby those manual scripts, which I call the maximum of thorny bushes, are minimized in the process, and that is turned over to a centralized control tool. So let's talk about equality just for a minute. In these larger organizations where you're attempting to define an enterprise process, it's not just Java and Eclipse or .NET and Visual Studio that teams are using. we go into larger organizations and they have everything from, Oracle forms, so they have Oracle developers, DBAs, tools that are or applications that are being written on top of Tomcat or WebSphere, C, C++, and yes, we even have customers that are doing some COBOL. It's not that unusual to still see the mainframe being sort of downsized to a Unix environment where they're actually doing COBOL development on Windows or Unix. So you have to be able to see your entire organization and understand the needs of everyone. And the tool and the process has to be able to fit everyone equally. That next level is this thing we call low friction. It really deals with an architecture that is open enough to allow all development teams to be the center of their development world. So in other words, they're not restricted in terms of what they want to use by the process or the centralized ALM tools. So this means that the solution that you deliver really requires a deep integration or open access to these productivity tools that your developers use. It should not restrict their use of a developer IDE, and in fact, it should enhance it. The check-in process, the building process, the deployment process should not impede the use of the developer's IDE. If a developer can do something inside the IDE, the process should be able to repeat what that developer does inside the IDE as well as outside the IDE. The testing process and static code analysis, these tools also should be integrated into that centralized control. So logging and reports all can be centralized into one area so that everybody can see what happened and there's never a question or time spent doing emails or phone calls to report on the success or failure of a build or a test or a deploy. And then finally, simplicity. Whatever we do, we need to do it, make it easy. In order to ease the concerns about moving away from the tools that developers are currently using, these older legacy tools, there's companies out there still using tools like RCS and PVCS. In order to ease those concerns, we have to show how life will be simplified for them. And the simplicity really comes with automation. Things like defining standardized workflow templates that allows a repeatable process and a clear approval path to production. Centralizing project requests, these reports and logs, and of course replacing anything that's done manually with automation. So if you think about being agile and you're still relying on literally the scripting processes from the last century, you can only be as agile as your scripts are. So if you have a dynamic process that you're trying to build around, you need to have an underlying process that is not static. So we're talking about full automation. So really these factors that we're talking about, a process and tool set that is truly equal to all development environments and doesn't provide better features for one team and takes away features for another, an open framework that really reduces the friction between productivity tools so it's easy to integrate, and a process that is truly automated and centralized will help ease the users' or villagers' concerns over holding on to their thorny bush and finally letting it go. This human factor is very real. It's the biggest challenge that you will face. Even though you're offering a better tool set and better processes, unless you can ease those concerns, you will always have the challenge of having those villagers let go of that thorny bush. So if you think about what you're looking at, what you're looking at currently is possibly several source code repositories, many different ways for builds to be executed. Your binaries for doing deployment being stored in multiple areas, and very little automation in the deployment step, whereby developers are having to hand-hold production control in order to get those applications rolled out the door. And many of the reasons that this occurs is that because there's such a difference in the tool sets, that the developers often have to be involved. If your process, however, can automate and centralize control, then your developers can begin letting go of some of those steps that they normally would do on the production end and focus what they need to do on the development end. So we're going to go through a demo today, and it's going to cover using TeamForge as the main driver of keeping control of centralized tasks. We're going to use Subversion as our source repository. It's going to interface with .NET and Java. We didn't go into, for this demo, Oracle Forms, however we could have. We're also going to be using Meister, our OpenMake Meister product, for managing the continuous integration process, including the generation of what would normally be coded as Ant or Maven or Make scripts. Meister will also control the centralized binary and do the deployments, all reporting back to TeamForge and for a central tracking method. Okay. So what we have here is TeamForge. And if you see, we have some GUI interface items that we need to do some work on. Our first one is changing an about box using the Eclipse IDE in Java. So we're going to update our about box. We're going to save our changes. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to commit it back to the Subversion repository. When we do so, we're going to use our artifact ID. Now I have my CI server quiet period set up to run instantly. It has a 1 second quiet period. So once we did that check-in, we began executing a Meister build. As you can see, the first step in that build was to generate what we call a build control file, which is similar to an Ant or a Make script. It also executed the build in what's called incremental processing, meaning it only made changes to the items that needed to be updated. And we executed some static code analysis and some testing, and we finally there are publishing the results back to the repository.
Hey, Tracy, this is Kevin. I'm not seeing that on my screen. I'm not sure.
Well, let me stop what I'm doing here. Go back to here.
Try sharing it again.
Okay.
No, I've got it.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So again, we have a artifact here for updating an about box in our Java application. We're going to go out to our Java application, and we're going to make a change. And we're going to go ahead and commit it back to the Subversion repository. When we do that, when we commit it, we're going to use the artifact ID as part of that, our comments. And once this is committed, immediately a CI build is going to run. You can set quiet periods for any amount of time. For this demo, we set it for 1 second, so nobody had to sit around and wait for 10 minutes. So we're going to go to Meister, and we're going to look at the build actually executing in the real-time build monitor. And we can see that we first generated a build control file, then we executed a build in incremental mode, meaning we only recompiled the items that needed to be recompiled. And then we re-executed some tests, and we published out to the Meister repository. Now, once that's complete, we're going to go back to, let me show you some of the trends and the reports that we get to show you that centralized logging capability. So our last build here was build 145. You see that the metalworks.jar file has been published to our repository. We also have some of the centralized execution of a find bugs report. Whatever steps were executed as part of our build get reported back. Now we're going to go back to TeamForge here. Oh, wait, one more thing. We're going to show you some trends. So over time, trends can be useful to understand where builds are having problems. If this particular build is having a high success rate or a high failure rate, it even can give you trends for your testing. So now if we notice here, we updated automatically when the build completed, we updated TeamForge so we know that it's ready for deployment. However, if you notice, we have a second artifact. And that second artifact is actually a .NET change that needs to be made. Now remember, we have to provide an equal environment for all developers. So what we just did for the Java developers, we need to be able to do for the .NET developers. So we're going to make a change for this message. So we're going to call it Hi World instead of Hello World. We're going to go ahead and commit it back to Subversion using our artifact ID. Now once that occurs, in the same way as we did for Java, we're going to immediately kick off a CI build. And just as if you were using a full TFS environment, we are going to go out there and generate the XML file for creating our .NET solution. And that CI build just kicked off, so you can see that the what we call this hierarchy build for .NET. This particular build is made up of multiple solution files, and we're only recompiling the solution that needs to be recompiled, even though we could do cross-solution dependency checking in the same way as we would do that for Java. Once those binaries have been created, we're going to publish them back to the repository. And notice that that step was not run because it did not fail. If we go take a look at that particular build, we can see that the binaries have been published. We'll go back to TeamForge, go back to our status here, and notice now that we have both of these artifacts are ready for deployment. So we're going to go back up to Meister. We're going to ask it to go ahead and execute our production deployment workflow to deploy our jars and DLLs that we needed to deploy for this change. And when Meister does this, it actually can automate the configuration of those production servers, but we're not going to get into those details in this demo. So if we go back to TeamForge, you can see now that the status has been updated to deployed for the items that were in our work items and our artifacts. So what this demo really demonstrates is that you can provide an equal environment for your developers regardless if they're using .NET or Java. Subversion can be used for both. If we had something like a DBA involved in this or somebody using Oracle Forms, that process could look exactly the same and the features would be equal for them. We then showed the simplicity factor by automating steps that normally are done manually, particularly the steps of generating a makefile or an AND script. If we had done a refactoring in the Java, for example, we would not have had to go back and update any of our scripts to make sure that the refactoring was reflected in the build scripts. We then showed how we can automatically update TeamForge. So TeamForge is notified of all activities occurring within the IDE and within the build, from opening a ticket all the way through deployment. And on that note, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Hey Tracy, this is Francesca, so I'll take over really quick now. Thank you. First off, thank you so much, Kevin and Tracy, for that wonderful presentation. And as Tracy said, we're going to take some questions from our audience now. And to the audience members, don't forget, if you have questions for our speakers, just go ahead and type them into the chat box located just to the right of the screen. So, starting off with this first question. This person asks, will we be able to integrate our existing tools, our existing tools like Eclipse, Calibre RM, CA Service Desk, or do all the tools have to be from CollabNet?
Hey, Francesca. This is Kevin. I'll take that one. No, they don't. So TeamForge itself is an open API which allows you to connect a number of different tools. Now, these are, if you will, some of the ones we often get asked about. So Eclipse itself, CollabNet has an integration to Eclipse called the CollabNet Desktop, and actually Tracy was showing portions of that using her demo, which allows you to bring the entire TeamForge environment into Eclipse. So you can do issues and subversion and actually the wikis and all those other things directly via Eclipse. Things with like requirements management, service desk, things like that, those you can take a couple different approaches. You can integrate into TeamForge itself. You can share out the final things. So if you're using a requirements management tool and you just want to share out the final requirements document, things like that, all those things can be integrated into TeamForge. Some of those integrations are available today for free. Some are services engagement depending on whether or not we have existing partnerships with those groups.
Okay. Does this also support C++ and Python?
I'll take that question. Absolutely. The demo that I showed could have been, would have looked a little different for Python, but very similar for C++. Of course, the difference would be if the code is compiled or translated, but it's not specific to any particular language. So the process that we demoed and the process that was shown is completely open to any language or any development tool that you may prefer to use.
Okay, all right. Kevin, are there any you see here that?
How about the one on the increased developer productivity and how that was measured?
Mm-hmm. So yes. So the question reads, how was the increased developer productivity measured? That's a good question.
So I'll take that one since I think it involves a case study I reviewed. So that was really measured actually by the developers themselves. So a questionnaire was sent out to each of the participants that had moved over to the CollabNet platform. They were asked a number of different questions, and one of those was, has your productivity increased by what percentage? Actually, what we were actually really happy to hear from that survey as much as possible was that almost, I think it was 94% of the respondents had increased their productivity once they moved over, and that on average it was at 20%. So that was a developer measure that they did.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, do you have anything to add to that? Would you like to add to that?
No, I don't think I have anything to add to it.
Okay, moving to the next one.
I will take question 3, though.
Okay, sure. Let me pull that one up really quick. Okay, so this question reads, what does this solution offer over a TFS/team build environment?
So TFS and team build or ClearCase and BuildForge, the real difference here is that we go back to that equality factor. The Microsoft TFS environment is a very nice self-contained environment, sort of from the .NET environment through the TFS check-in and then team build executing the compile process without having to do any kind of scripting and even all the way through deployment. It can't handle, of course, a Java compile, nor can it easily handle multiple solution files. What we showed you was a process that can handle both a TFS-like environment, whereby everything is sort of self-contained and reporting back to a central process, but it supports not just the .NET environment very well, but it also supports the other environments, such as Java. I would say it would be similar to a ClearCase to BuildForge environment. The ClearCase was really written around C and C Unix. It has a great tool called ClearMake, but it certainly is legacy and is not easily able to support even a .NET XML format kind of a build or a Java Ant scripted environment. So again, we get back to these legacy systems that were built around specific kinds of tools, or systems that may not be legacy but are still built around a specific tool, and it loses that equality factor, which is then going to cause anxiety for the other development teams that are sort of out in the cold. So that's the biggest difference, is the ability, that equality factor.
All right. Before we move on, I just want to remind the audience, if you've got questions, you can ask our speakers those questions by just chatting it into the chat box, and that's located to the right of the screen. So next question, Kevin, is there anyone in particular you'd like me to ask?
Sure, Francesca. How about number 4?
Number 4 reads, what is the process for converting from a tool like PVCS require, or what kind of requirements does that take?
Sure. So when we talk, we get questions a lot from our customers about, I'm using version control tool, whatever, and in this case PVCS, and how do I move from that into Subversion? So there's really a few different options you typically have. What we typically recommend is what we call snapshot migration. Take a few of your latest versions, bring those over into Subversion and start working from there. You may want to keep around a few copies of PVCS to maintain your history, but once you start moving over and start using it, we don't see oftentimes that you go back too far in history anyway. But we also do get people who say, well, what if I want to move everything over? What we typically then suggest is that can be done, but what you first want to do is do the snapshot migration first anyway. Get people over to Subversion, get them working on the latest things, and then go back and start to move everything over. What we at CollabNet do oftentimes is engage with our partners like OpenMake. OpenMake has a great experience in PVCS, and so we often engage with them to actually do full history migrations, and I'll let Tracy talk about that.
Okay.
So yes, sometimes it's more challenging to do those full history migrations, but they can be done. The biggest challenge, again, is the thorny bush factor. Once your developers understand the reasons why they need to move from a tool like PVCS, then the conversion process actually can be pretty simple. I think the biggest challenge in the actual conversion process is not moving over between PVCS and Subversion, but it is addressing all of those static scripts that I keep talking about that's going to be connected to a makefile or an Ant script that's actually calling into the PVCS repository to do checkouts. So sometimes that's the bigger challenge, is to make sure that those scripts are addressed in some way, either replaced with a tool like Meister or rewritten or updated so that the calls are correct. But moving the history is not necessarily a big issue. Again, the bigger issue is making sure that all the developers, all the villages are on board with letting go of the thorny bush.
Mm-hmm. So what about CVS? Is there any support for that?
I'll say that. Are we talking, I'm not sure if, so there's support for CVS in terms of migrating. The migration from CVS to Subversion is actually pretty clean. It's cleaner than some. But I'll let Kevin answer the question in terms of TeamForge supporting CVS.
Yeah, so TeamForge itself supports CVS out of the box, so it's another repository we can connect to. And then, as Tracy stated, if you're actually looking to migrate from CVS to Subversion, that process is actually pretty straightforward. There's automated scripts out there available today that'll do a full history migration.
Okay. What about managing differences in configuration variables on a per environment basis?
Wait, what was the question again?
What about managing differences in configuration variables on a per environment basis?
That is a great question, and it is addressed at certain states in the life cycle. First, it's addressed at the build level. At the build level, you have literally different compile options, which I would kind of call configuration variables, that need to be managed at a file level or at an entire, what we would call a build level, so for everything in the build. Meister allows you to manage configurations at multiple levels. It allows you to manage the configurations of multiple servers in a server pool, or a single server, or at a build level, what we would call a global level, or for an entire workflow. So a workflow would be executing a Subversion checkout, executing a Meister build, running tests. So there's different levels of configurations that need to be managed, and Meister allows you to manage them at all of those different levels, all the way down to managing the configurations for a deployment. So if you're deploying to a particular machine and you need to update deployment descriptors, Meister allows you to manage those configurations all the way down to that level. Mm-hmm. And all of those all that metadata, all that configuration metadata is then stored in the Meister repository, so you can report on it and you can see what those configurations are without having to go to the machine that it's running on and actually look at it.
Oh, okay. Right. What about some of the best practices for managing database states? That's like that is database versioning in this type of environment.
I can take the first stab at that. So really managing the databases, so there's two levels of versioning, right? There's the version of the release level of the database itself, what actual release level you're on of the database. And that actually has runtime or build level components that need to be mapped back to the compile process. So the first step is to make sure that the version of the database and the runtime modules are going to match what you're actually going to compile with. Now, between Subversion and Meister, those level of components can be very tightly managed. The second level is the actual changing of the tables. So you have basically your DDL that needs to be versioned. We highly recommend to all of our customers that they check their DDL into Subversion. When Meister goes to actually build the environment, it can then create the tables as part of the build process, so that the database, the state of the database is not any different from the state of source code. DBAs often see that their kind of work, they're changing tables as different from what developers do in terms of changing source code. But when you get right down to the bits and bytes, it's not any different. It's the process that the DBAs may use. If they're using DDL, then that can easily be managed, and everything around that can easily be automated, all the way down to updating TeamForge so that TeamForge can say that there's an artifact or a work item out there that indicates that a table change needs to be made, and that information can then be passed back to the build environment that says, okay, the table change has been made, we're ready to compile.
Okay. Kevin, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think Tracy handled that one very well.
Okay, wonderful. Really quick, we're coming up to, or approaching the top of the hour, but a person asks, and Kevin, you spoke about the white paper earlier. Where are these people, or where can everybody get a copy of the white paper?
Sure. The white paper will actually sent out to all the folks that registered, so they'll be receiving a copy of that.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so we've reached noon, or well, noon Eastern Daylight Savings Time as far as my time zone is concerned, but let's go a little bit more, just a couple of minutes more to tackle some of these questions. So Kevin, is there anyone here that you would like me to ask in particular? Because we've got some in queue.
Sure. So how about the one on easily import my existing build scripts?
Okay, wonderful. This one reads, can I easily import my existing build scripts and convert them, or am I limited to just running what I have?
So this will really depend on if you're continuing to use your current version control tool. So if you're moving from Subversion, or if you're currently using Subversion and you're just going to start now using TeamForge to manage your overall ALM process, then in those cases you can just use your current build script. But if you're changing your code repository, then you will have to look at changing those build scripts as well. Oftentimes that is as simple as doing a global replace, and if you're using CVS today, that can be simplified simply because Subversion CVS use the same commands, and it's just changing to the Subversion URL. Tracy has a whole lot more experience in that as well, so I'll let her comment as well.
Okay.
So the build scripts themselves, again, if you're moving from one version control tool to another, you generally need to address them in some way. You're going to have to at least update them because the calls out to the old version control tool will no longer work with the new one. The bigger problem, though, is that most of the pain around compiling and the ALM process in general are broken builds. So if you want to get better performance, you want to accelerate your builds, be able to do parallel builds easily, being able to build development and a test and an emergency production release all at the same time, generally you need to do something about your scripts because you're talking about a dynamic environment and you're relying on static scripts. So really the best way to approach it is to look to see what your pain is, how much investment you're making in maintaining those scripts, and then make a decision on whether you want to keep them or not because they're not necessary. And in fact, in most of the IDE environments, what we find is that if you look at a solution file or a Eclipse project file, that information is more accurate than what the static Ant script has in them. So the more that you can create a process that drives and against the solution or the project files from your IDE, the more accurate and the more consistent your build environment is going to be. Again, we get back to a thorny bush. Those scripts are, oftentimes people have attachments to them, and by holding on to them, they lose the benefit of really being able to become agile, speed up their environment, and do something as simple as checking in and doing an incremental build instead of a full build every single time. So you really have to sort out what you're striving for, how improved you want your process, and where the pain is and where you want to, if your knee is hurting all the time, do you want to have surgery?
Okay.
But Meister will allow you to execute any kind of a make or an Ant script that you would like to execute. So there's no requirement that says you have to get rid of those scripts.
All right. I think we've got time for one more question. Anyone stand out in particular?
I might suggest that last one.
Of course. Okay. This one reads, when you talk about migration, it's not just SCM tool migration to other tools or other tools. It may include migration of a whole ALM processes and tools, for example, defect tracking tool, reporting, etc. So what is the best approach for this migration of a legacy system, especially when you're exposing the same to the customers?
So this is really why we don't suggest you take the big bang approach and think that you're going to be able to turn off one thing on a Friday and start again on Monday fresh. You really need to start. Really need to take a look at each of those different things you're going to be moving over, each of the different teams you're going to be moving over, and all the different factors that that's going to take. It may be that you start all new projects and all new teams on the new tool and new process. That gives you a green field, if you will. There's no legacy, etc. And then for those other things that you're going to be bringing over, Tracy just used the great knee analogy. It's really that. Which of those things are causing you the most pain today? Which of those things do you want to tackle? And how do you want to tackle that? And how important are those to your business? You have to take a look at the release schedule, the people, the processes that they're moving, and then tweak the schedule and figure out the process you want to use based on those things. We all live in the real world, and we have to take the business into consideration and our deliverables into consideration as we look to transform. Tracy?
Yeah, and as I pointed out in my presentation, it is the human factor that is the most difficult to approach. So what we normally see when we're looking at doing a migration from not just an SCM, not just a versioning tool, but the whole ALM process, is you build it, and then you begin rolling it out to teams based on what we like to call a compliance scorecard. So once you have a system built out that teams can begin moving to on their own time frame, you can define levels of compliance. Say the first level of compliance is they're starting to use the enterprise versioning tool or the enterprise defect tracking tool. The second level of compliance might be they're centralizing all their compile process. And you give those teams time to understand what the compliance levels are. You keep your compliance level reports so that upper management can understand where everybody's at, and you work with those teams in defining when they're going to be at the highest level of compliance, even if it takes sometimes a year for them to get there. Depending on their own project schedules, they have their own users who are demanding changes that they have to deliver, and it may not be convenient for them to move over to a new system when it's convenient for the central ALM team for that to do the move. So the compliance scorecard works really well, and building it out, defining those levels of compliance, and then working with each team to move into the system is sort of the same approach.
Okay, wonderful. I think that those answers after hearing those answers is a wonderful place to stop. That concludes our presentation for today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kevin Hancock and Tracy Regan. Thank you so much for your presentations. You're welcome. And also thank you to our audience and everybody else who attended.